Sega challenges you with the ultimate video game, the Sega Master System.
Phantasy Star. Every time I've had a conversation about the best classic JRPGs, this one gets mostly overlooked. It was released here in the States in 1987 on the Sega Master System, which right away doomed it to obscurity. The Master System barely sold a fraction of the units that the NES sold. We're talking about an effective difference of 48 million consoles. It was also the most expensive game ever when it came out, selling at one time for $80. With that in mind, it's unsurprising that most players had their first Phantasy Star experience in games like PSO and Universe. I myself have played a good amount of PSO too, and I recently got back into New Genesis on the back of some very welcome improvements. But something that I had never done prior to making this video was play through the original Phantasy Star. So today, we're going to be doing that, mostly. I'm not going to mess with it either. No fan translations or patches. I want the experience that the rest of North America would have had at the time. When you power on this system, the music cues first before you ever see the title. First thing I need to say is that this is not the real music. Without the Sega Mark III FM module, about half of the composition is missing. The music you'll hear throughout this video is the Japan-only FM soundtrack. What we actually got here in the States sounds pretty bad. On starting the game, we're greeted with a cutscene that cuts through all of the bullshit and just gives us the most important part of the story. Space Century 342, Caminite on the planet Palma. A young rebel named Nero has been beaten to near death by minions of the evil king Lassic. Nero's sister, a young woman named Alice, rushes to his side where he tells her that she must find a man named Odin, who may be able to help her bring an end to Lassic's tyranny. Then he succumbs to his injuries, and he dies. Alice swears revenge on the Empire for the death of her brother, and then the game begins. This is a really dark opening. Already, the world has pulled me in and given me an enemy and a purpose, and we didn't need an hour of exposition to get there. I spent the first few minutes wandering around, getting a feel for the controls and menus, and talking to NPCs for information. In this time, I managed to learn a few extra things about the lore. First, the planet we're on right now is called Palma, and is a part of the Algol star system. Second, Lassic isn't just the king of Palma, but rather the entire Algol star system. Suddenly, this revenge task feels a lot more tremendous than it was before. Aside from the lore, this is actually a great time to talk about some of the first gameplay bits that we're introduced to here. The Master System controller has extremely limited possibilities. Pressing the 2 button opens the menu, shows the first-person view of the tile you're standing on, and is used to select things. Pressing button 1 cancels menus and text boxes. You don't have to press either of the action buttons to enter doors or talk to NPCs, all you have to do is walk into them. Unlike the NES controller, the Master System doesn't have any independent start or select buttons, so this is a fairly intuitive way to make up for all of that. At the northeast edge of Caminite, we get the first look at one of the biggest reasons this game is so special. Phantasy Star is an early first-person dungeon crawler with smooth movement on an 8-bit console. Fuck me running, this is the most impressive use of 8-bits I've ever seen. Absolutely nothing on the NES even cuts it close to this. The closest thing I can think of is Megami Tensei, but that is nowhere near as advanced as this is, and there's a reason for that. The story goes that lead programmer Yuji Naka, who you might remember as the Sonic the Hedgehog creator who was recently arrested for alleged insider trading, wanted to provide the player with a game similar to Wizardry, but with smooth scrolling to help the player better understand what direction they were moving. At first, the team had been drawing full backgrounds with greater detail to be animated in real time and used for the 3D dungeon perspective. The kilobytes and the amount of frames required to build the dungeons were just too heavy, so Naka and the team did something that really had never been done before. Naka programmed a true 3D wireframe model to build the dungeons, and the artists then superimposed tiles and graphics on top of that and made them all look similar. This method managed to save a full 3/4 worth of memory on the cartridge, and the Master System handled all of it so well that the dungeons originally ran unplayably fast. If you think about it, Phantasy Star was one of the first, very first true 3D console games that wasn't just a point-scrolling illusion. This dungeon is mostly empty, but there's a chest with 50 Maseda and we absolutely need that. On the other side of Caminite, an NPC will give you a strange pot that we'll need here in a little while. There are 3 stores here, and each of them provides something different. This specific armory sells shields. The food shop sells colas and burgers, which I'm pretty sure are supposed to be Monument and Diamond, like every other Phantasy Star. And the secondhand shop sells flashes, escapers, and transfers. If I had to take an educated guess, I'm betting transfer is just a mistranslation for telepipe. 2 other notable landmarks here are the free rest stop, which is something that I'll be religiously returning to, and the church to revive dead party members, but we don't have any extra party members yet. The first thing we have to do on our quest for revenge is get a little bit stronger. Upon leaving Caminite, we get introduced to the overworld, and we get to take our first shot at this game's combat system. It's here where we discover just how much of a wimpy weakling we are. There are a few different kinds of enemies we can fight right away, but most of them are too strong to take on. Instead, the grind has to be handled methodically. We've got to slay some swarms first. They're the easiest, weakest enemy, but at level 1 with the worst gear, even a swarm can be dangerous. Until we level up, we won't be venturing beyond the gate. We want to stay as close to the free rest as possible. We also want to be saving as often as we win, because some of the stronger enemies will prevent escape and one-shot you, potentially setting you back a lot. The combat system itself will be pleasantly familiar to anybody who's ever played a JRPG before. It's the traditional turn-based format that most JRPGs use. You have your basic attack, which will get better as you level up and equip better gear. You also learn spells as you level up. First spell that you learn is Heal, which makes it easier to venture out further into the world. As your defense stat increases, you'll take a lot less damage and your chance to dodge enemy attacks will get higher. There aren't any photon arts or techniques yet, but this is still a good amount of depth to the battle system. Once we've slain enough swarms and earned enough Meseta, we can equip ourselves with better gear, which means we can take on stronger enemies and multiple enemies. You really want to stick to the strongest things you can fight against at that time, otherwise you'll just be grinding swarms forever. In a port town to the east, I came across a secondhand shop selling secrets for 300 Meseta. I honestly thought this was a spell or something, so I went back to buy it, and then I was promptly told I shouldn't be asking questions, and I was thrown out of the store. Well, now you piqued my curiosity, Cooper. I go back in a second time and try to buy the secrets again. This time, the dialogue's different, which is an indication that I should probably just annoy this guy until he gives me what I want. I get thrown out a second time and go back in, but this time the shopkeeper just doesn't feel like arguing. He sells us a road pass that we can then use to gain entry to the Palma spaceport, which we can then use to travel to the planet Matavia. In a Matavian shop, I met a guy who offered to sell me an animal for $1 billion, but that's extremely unrealistic, so I crushed his dreams and said no. Instead, he offered to trade what he's got for that pot that we were given earlier, and here we meet our first party companion, Meow. Meow is a talking cat, and it tells us that it was trying to get an antidote to Odin, who's been turned to stone in Medusa's cave. Meow, unfortunately, is a cat and can't open the bottle. Alice offers to deliver the antidote and open the bottle, so from here we go immediately back to Palma. After buying a couple of flashes, we make our way south of the city where we find Medusa's cave. Tucked away in the back of the dungeon is Odin, trapped in stone and standing stationary. We free him, and he tells us that he sucks. He also tells us that he left a compass somewhere in the dungeon that we can use to navigate through a portion of the forest. Something I need to bring up at this point is how hard the difficulty spikes after this. With 2 more extra party members, you run the risk of running into 6 powerful enemies all at once. By this point, we have the full medium gear for Alice, but Meow and Odin are still running their most basic sets. Odin has decent hit points, but a really weak attack. Meow has the lowest hit points, doesn't have a good attack, and doesn't have a good defense stat, which means those hit points decrease faster than everyone else. Right now, Meow sucks, and Alice is the strongest party member and is also playing the support healer role. You remember earlier when I mentioned the church to revive dead party members? Well, get used to hiking your ass back there, because Meow's gonna die quite a few times before we make any real progress. The party needs a support role, and so far, we don't have that. We have 2 fighters and a cat that can't do very much. Where the fuck is a white mage when you need one? A little further to the southeast of the cave is the village of Epi. The elder of the village tells us that he's hidden a dungeon key in the Caminite warehouse. Are you fucking serious? I fight my way all the way over here just for you to tell me to go back to where I started to pick up an item that I could only get after talking to you. This is more padding, and it sucks. This game had really good pacing until I got extra party members, and it didn't. Now it's starting to feel like a slog. Handing me a fetch quest when I didn't need one is interruptive and isn't fun. Another villager here tells us that somebody named Noah can be found on Matavia, so first we go back to Caminite to get the dungeon key, and then we're off. After getting the dungeon key, I made my way to another dungeon to the north that I found earlier first, though. At the bottom of that dungeon was a lunatic selling shortcake for 1,000 mez. That cake better be cooked in a fucking volcano or there's no justifying this. Dungeon key in hand, I go back to Matavia and make my way toward the governor's mansion. It's a good thing I hit up that shortcake vendor because it coincidentally was the exact gift I needed in order to visit the governor at all. And I didn't talk to the NPC who tells you that until long after the fact. The governor gives us a letter and tells us that Noah is training in a cave to the north, so north we go. We fight our way through the dungeon and finally meet Noah, who turns out to be the white mage that our party has needed the whole time. Noah doesn't have a heal spell immediately though, which is not good. Eventually, she learns Cure, which is a super-powered version of the spell Heal, but it doesn't happen right away, and by the time Noah has it, Meow already has it. But at least now I understand why you're forced to temporarily use your strongest fighter as a support role. The whole idea behind this design is to signify the importance of the team collectively. Alice herself really isn't the stoic hero type. Her journey begins slowly slowly, with her getting stronger as she ventures further into the world. Once she's become strong and self-sustainable, she can focus all of that growth into helping grow her less than stellar teammates. Remember, Meow is just a cat who couldn't figure out how to open a bottle, and Odin is a meathead who pulled the fuck around and find out with Medusa. Neither of them have taken the same serious approach to training that Alice has, and both of them have already been captured once. It's only when the trio becomes a well-oiled machine that they can venture further in together. By this point though, even Alice needs Noah because the growth should be happening much closer together. The world isn't less dangerous for Alice than it is for the rest of the party, it's equally dangerous for everyone. That means it's time to really get into the serious teamwork part of the mission. And serious teamwork we need. Noah tells us that a secret passageway disguised as a manhole will take us beyond the mountain on Palma. The fight through the dungeon to actually get to her was pretty rough, and the fight to get out wasn't better. Everyone except for Alice died while escaping from the dungeon, and Alice almost did too. By the time I finally got back to town, I had 2 HP, and I had been saving every few steps. I was worried that I might die in every encounter trying to escape, but I made it. After resting at the inn just outside of the governor's mansion, we're off to Palma. Back at the spaceport, we find the secret passageway, and it leads us to a mostly destroyed village called Gothic, on the land across the river. 2 of the villagers are willing to trade you information for cola, and one of them is schizophrenically guarding the east exit from the village. Thankfully, there's a church to the south edge of the village for resurrection. This is huge. The next stop on our ridiculous journey is the Tower of Medusa, but not before training a little bit more first. Before heading off to the tower, I went back to East Palma toward the beach to explore a dungeon that I'd neglected earlier. After that, I went back to Gothic, and from there made my way around the mountain to a village full of scrap metal. Just north of that village is a cave system that takes us north across the river, where we pass through more ignorable villages before landing in Abian. Here, I bought something called polymaterial at the food shop, and then I made my way through another cave system and came out on an island in the center of town. There on the island, a mad scientist killed my cat, so I and the party gave him a smackdown of a lifetime. I think this is a boss battle, but honestly, it was pretty much the same as fighting any other enemy, except Mad Doctor here has a very unhealthy fixation on animals. After reviving Meow and resting the party, it's finally time to take on Medusa's tower. First though, you remember that scrap metal village? We need to stop there first and use the polymaterial on some garbage. Even though we don't quite need him yet, Hapsby's a crucial plot item. On entering Medusa's tower, I immediately got attacked by a dragon. I figured now is a good time to bring up the enemy design. At the beginning of the game, I was getting my ass kicked if I fought more than one swarm at a time. Gradually, as you get stronger, the enemies get bigger and more plentiful. You go from barely being able to fight a few bugs to fighting dragons and groups of Manicore, to fighting bigger things like giants. This game does a really good job of making you feel like you're getting stronger. Unfortunately, that also means it does a great job of reminding you just how weak you are a lot of the time. Before I even touch Medusa's tower, I have to grind. This isn't the first time I've had to fight a few battles before I can go somewhere or do something, but this is by far the worst. Almost everything in the game has felt well done up to this point. We've been moving along at a fairly brisk pace. The pacing gets completely fucking interrupted when we discover that enemies in the tower are 50% more powerful than the entire party together. This is bullshit. It was the first truly grind-heavy part of the experience, and I hate it. Everything was going so well. I was having a really good time, and I was staying engaged. Now I'm fucking bored out of my mind because the task at hand is walk around back and forth, press the A button repeatedly to win fights until I'm strong enough to take on the tower. It's inconveniences like this that take what could be a 10 out of 10 experience and turn it into a 7 or an 8. I don't mind a bit of grinding here and there, but this is a poor design choice. It's a very out-of-place difficulty spike in what's already a decently difficult game that's already had a difficulty spike. You don't need all of the fluff grinding to pad out the experience, because the experience is already doing an amazing job. I'm 7.5 hours into the game already. It isn't exactly hurting for runtime. In that 7.5 hours, I've done and seen so many cool things, and all of that came to a complete halt in a matter of seconds. It's like having a bad good steak. It's tender, it smells good, and everything is going well until you bite into a part that's overcooked. Suddenly it's like eating a shoe. You keep chewing, you can't even really tell if it's making a difference, and eventually you spit it out. Phantasy Star is a really good game, but I'm not gonna force myself to keep playing it. Instead, this is your spoiler warning. I'm just gonna tell you how it ends, so if you don't want to hear this, then skip to the outro chapter of the video. You ready? We good? Okay, here it is. Lassic was secretly being brainwashed by Dark Falls. The party kills him, and then Alice learns that her father was once the king of the star system. She takes his place as queen, and that's the end of the game. It's a good reward, but it's not worth the extra grinding that it takes to get there. As far as JRPGs go, this one is really good. The battle system has enough speed and depth to keep it engaging for a while. Visually, it's one of the best looking games to come out of the 80s. The music from the North American copy is garbage, but the Japan-only Mark 3 FM soundtrack is one of the best in video game history. The 3D dungeon crawling is impressive as fuck, and really just makes this game a one-of-a-kind experience, something that you have to see to believe. The sad reality is, there are just too many problems holding back what could have been a first-try masterpiece. The overwhelming amount of player punishment right from the beginning makes the whole thing feel more restrictive than it should. It's incredibly linear, and it gives you this fake sense of exploration by forcing you to backtrack constantly. There's no depth to the gear and party customization. It all amounts to grinding for Masada to buy the next strongest thing with no real thought put into it. There's also not much depth to spells. Fire and Wind are the only attack spells. Noah's supposed to be a support mage, but Meow has all of the best in-battle support spells. Noah and Meow can both cast Cure, but only Meow can cast it in battle. The most useful spells in the game are Rope and Wall because they allow for some temporary free hits. Odin just sucks and is useless. He can't use spells, and he misses constantly. I don't know if there's an item to restore magic or not, but I never found one. Stores sell mislabeled Monument and Diamond, which are both only healing items. That means you need to plan most of your movement around your magic consumption and how many healing items you have. If you get too far, run out of magic, and run out of healing items, then you'd better be sure to keep a transfer handy. Otherwise, you'll have to start the painstaking process of inching your way back to town while saving every few steps. There are also only 2 rest stops to restore magic between the planets that I saw, and one of them is on Matavia, which means you'll almost never be going there. You'll be hiking back to Kamenet so often that you may as well never leave. Phantasy Star isn't a bad game by any means, but now I know why it doesn't come up often. Underneath all of the cool exterior and great ideas are a slew of problems that hinder the experience. It's a good game. I'm glad I played as much of it as I did. I'm just not gonna slog through the grind to get to an ending that I don't really care about. The closure for me here is knowing that I played it at all since I hadn't even given it a glance before. I think with all that in mind, I feel comfortable giving Phantasy Star a rating of 8 out of 10. I had a mostly good experience, and I'm glad that I had it. I wish it would have been better, but that really doesn't matter now. For what it is, Phantasy Star is a technical marvel and a good idea clouded by a slew of questionable design decisions. So was Final Fantasy though. The fact is that this game launched for $80 on a console that held a really small market share. If it had been normally priced and the Master System were more successful, this would be just as highly regarded as Final Fantasy, maybe even more so. It's a victim of circumstance more than it is its own flaws, and even though my personal experience came to a halt, I know that not everybody had my same experience. 8 out of 10 works for me, because that's how I feel about it right now. But years ago, a younger me with a different mindset easily would have given this game a solid 10. I wouldn't have cared about the grinding and padding so much back then, but now, as an adult with limited time, I care a lot. Pushing any farther than I did would just hurt the experience that I had. Thank you, and have a nice day.